Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us today for the next session during the conference. I'm joined today by two colleagues, Mike Wardman and Aldane Stennett, and I'll introduce you to those in a moment. Today's session, we're going to be looking at how NEBOSH develops qualifications. And the reason we thought this might bring a bit of value to you guys is that it'll encourage you to think maybe differently about how you develop your own training. But the main thrust of today's session is going to be around the importance of consultation and about how consulting with colleagues, peers, or even those who the training is going to affect really helps bring the subject into sharp focus, helps you see which bits of the training that you may be thinking of developing or writing are going to bring the most value. Because, you know, sometimes you start with a blank page and what you think the training should be in or about isn't actually what is needed. And it's only when you start talking to people, talking to those who are using it, know it, understand it, just as we do with risk assessment, that you actually start bringing something of real value. So today's session, I'll do the introductions in a moment. I'll give you a little bit of scene setting. Audience participation, I really ask you to, I'll mention that now. If you've got any questions, please keep them coming through. And we'll respond to those that we can. We've already been out via our socials, and I've got some questions as well that I'll be firing to the panelists. But if you've got any questions, please post them through, and we'll respond to them as and when we can. We'll then get into how NEBOSH and HSE develops qualifications, because NEBOSH and HSE do qualifications together. Hopefully you're aware of that. The purpose of qualification development panels, and finally we'll start looking at some constructs and a bit of syllabus review as well if we've got time. But first of all, let me just do some intro. So I'm Matt Powell-Howard. I'm head of product development at NEBOSH. Been here a long time in lots and lots of different roles. But without any shadow of a doubt, developing qualifications, being involved in qualification development is the part that I love most, because I get to work with some incredible people. I have a fabulous team around me. But actually, you know, you're really producing something tangible, which I absolutely love. I really, really enjoy my role. So I'm joined today by Mike. Mike, would you like to introduce yourself? You know yourself far better than I do.
Okay, thanks. I'm Mike Wardman. I work at the UK Health and Safety Executive in the Science Division. I'm a risk and process safety specialist, I guess, with a chemical engineering background. I support the policy and regulatory teams within HSE on major hazard risk topics, things like coma, and recently aspects related to introduction of net zero technologies. That's probably enough from me, Matt.
Thanks, Mike.
Yes.
Aldane, do you want to introduce yourself? And I would say Aldane's kindly joining us very early time of the day at home, tuning in from, is it Trinidad you're in, Aldane?
Jamaica.
Jamaica, forgive me, stupid me. So thanks so much for joining us today, Aldane. I know you say you've had a very early start today. So please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm Aldane Stennett, HSE professional, certified, a registered professional engineer. I'm a process engineer, chemical engineer, like my colleague. I've delved into process safety management over the years. My current portfolio in terms of operation is in the utility sector, more so with the power generation, transmission and distribution of electricity. So I'm responsible for managing the health, safety, and environmental portfolio in one of the regions. And importantly, process safety is a biggie as part of that, managing that portfolio.
Brilliant. Thanks, Aldane. And you may have picked up that both Aldane and Mike are obviously process safety specialists. And the qualification that we're going to focus on today is our process safety certificate, just because it's currently undergoing a review. So the time is really good for us to start thinking about that qualification and about any specific needs within that qualification. And obviously, Mike and Aldane are absolute specialists in the field. So we're picking on them today to share with us some of their thoughts about the direction that qualification should go in. So let's make a start then. So what some scene setting, what are we looking to address, and who is the current NEBOSH HSE Certificate in Process Safety Management for? So this qualification has been around since about 2000 and oh, blimey, 16, 17. So it's due its annual. It's due its 5-year revisit. We tend to revisit our qualifications on a 5-year cycle. Don't for a minute assume that once you launch a product, a training solution, whatever it may be, that it's going to be fit for purpose forevermore, because it won't be. Things change. We all know that. Legislation changes, approaches changes, technology improves, gets better. Challenges may be changing. So it's really important that you regularly revise and review and keep a sharp focus on your training and your training materials to see if they need updating. So it's time to revisit the HSE Certificate in Process Safety Management. We offer this in conjunction with our colleagues at HSE. And initially, it's a really good illustration really about what you think you're going to develop and what you actually need becomes something else. So when I initially went out talking to employers, it was about our oil and gas qualification, to see what it is that people liked about that qual, what they thought we needed to change. And what became really obvious from the conversations I was having was that there was a real need for something on process safety management, not the wider aspects of hydrocarbon process safety that the oil and gas qualification brings, upstream, midstream, downstream, but a real focus on what process safety management is and how culture change can be affected by some good quality training. So that's how we then ended up with this qualification. So we developed that some 5 years ago. It's doing really, really well. It's proven to be very, very popular in the marketplace, and it's filled in that need. But it is time for a change. So we developed this qualification. It's not for chemical or process safety engineers. It's for frontline managers, supervisors, process ops. And I used to be a process op when Nelson was allowed 1 million years ago. That's what I did when I first left school. So being able to draw down on some of that experience was also invaluable. But that was a long time ago. So again, I might think what the market needs is correct, but until I start talking to people, I've no idea. And actually, there was parts of it that I hadn't even considered. For example, when we developed this, I hadn't really thought about process safety in foods because that's not my background. But of course, there's an absolute need for it. So, again, the importance of talking to people at the right time and the right people is essential. So people who do the process safety qual generally have got some health and safety knowledge. They might be NEBOSH qualified. It's not essential, but they will have some understanding of health and safety management in their marketplace. And all these things are important when you start thinking about who your audience is. So some of the broad themes of the qualification, you guys can all read. I'm not going to take you through each and every one of those, but they're the main themes that we pulled out from talking to people about the importance of, safe startup and shutdown. Hazard and controls, chemical reactions, purpose of emergency plans, how you test them, why you have them, asset integrity management, all that sort of important stuff. There's a good word for you. So that's what the topics include at the moment. So they're the broad themes. So when we develop a qualification, some training, whatever it may be, if I went back out there as a health and safety bod and I was asked to develop some training, I'd start thinking of constructs first. What are the abstract concepts that define what we want to achieve? What broadly is it that we want people to be able to do? And then you then can bring that down into your learning outcomes, which are much more specific, much more measurable. And it's those learning outcomes, what people are going to be able to do when they finish that training. And then I can then use that to inform the type of assessment that I might develop. So, and I would always encourage where you can to do some form of assessment, whichever training you're doing, be it a NEBOSH qualification or be it some of your own training. Think about how you can check that training's worked. And actually, I find that it's a question I often ask people when I speak to them about training. And they go, oh, yeah, we've got this in our competency matrices. We save everybody on X course. And I always say, do you check that it's worked? Because sometimes it can just be a box. Oh, I've put everybody through that behavioral safety change training. Okay. Well, we all know behavioral safety change might take generations, but what's your measures to see if it's worked? How are you working out whether or not it's had the impact that you wanted it to have? Do you need to rethink, revise, go again? So if you think of it as constructs, big picture, learning outcomes, that much more actionable targets for instruction and developing the assessment that supports the training. But it's on the constructs, those bigger thoughts, those bigger ideas that we'll focus on today. Because when we develop something, that's what I focus on first. That's what my team focus on first. We're looking for the broad themes, and then we then think about how we can refine that down and get more into the detail. So How we develop qualifications then. Now look at that for a slide. I can promise you that's the worst slide you'll see on today's conference. It's awful, but that's also just showing you, that's actually taken from our procedures. That's just a nice Visio drawing there of, and don't start pointing questions on when a square should be a square and when a diamond should be a diamond. This is just something that we find really, really useful to help picture how it is we develop our qualifications. It's complex, but we're doing regulated qualifications. So we have to go through all these steps, these revisions. We're also doing publications off the back of it. But designing qualifications, training in an efficient way and a well thought out way, you really need to think about what your process is behind it. It really isn't you just sat at your desk with a blank piece of paper. There needs to be a lot more steps. Not as complicated as that. That's what comes with doing regulated qualifications. But the two areas I really like to focus on today are going to be the importance of consultation right at the beginning. That's where you absolutely have to consult. And then again, with us, we do it again before we launch it. And we do it by something called a PDP. Product development panel, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But those two parts of the process, really thinking about it at the beginning and just before launch, is absolutely essential in my view. So if I can move this slide on. Many of you will be very, very familiar with this sort of process. Plan, Do, Check Act, or Plan, Do, Review Act in this case, is what we do with all our qualifications. And you can see how often stakeholder input goes into that process. So really start thinking about, what do people need? What do they want? We then start thinking about what that could look like. We go back to them again. We start asking them if that looks about right. We then launch the product, but then we're reviewing whether or not it's working, and we're starting the process all over again. And although we do a big review every 5 years, if there's any massive significant changes, then we'll do it much sooner. We've done full reviews again after 2-3 years because legislation's changed, for example. And I think I did mention earlier about the importance of revisiting. And not only do you end up with a better product at the end of it, you also are making sure that you're hitting the intended outcomes. People are able to do what you want them to do. They're taking away with them those skills, knowledge, understanding, expectations that you want them to do. And we often pilot as well. I think that's really worth mentioning here. When we first launched our oil and gas qualification, we did a full pilot. And we decided that it wasn't fit for purpose, and we withdrew it. We did a full redevelopment again, piloted again. Pilot was successful, and the qualification went off, and it's been very, very successful for a number of years. So, the importance of piloting, we would always do that, certainly with a new assessment, to make sure it works and it's fit for purpose. So yeah, piloting, really think about doing that as well as part of your process. So qualification development panels. So the purpose really is to approve the technical content of NEBOSH quals. So we bring in the great and the good of the health and safety world, and two of them are here today in Aldane and Mike. They're the sort of people that we would invite in and ask if we could, pick their brains and say, we've developed this, what do you think of it? And I always say to my team, look, the dress code at such events is a thick skin, because we might think that we've developed something that's absolutely great, that looks brilliant. And it's when people come in and start looking at it and start picking it and digging under the surface, then things do have to change. And honestly, absolutely everything I've ever developed for NEBOSH has been better for other people having a view on it, taking a look at it, commenting on it. There comes a time when you have to go, okay, that's great. There comes a time as well when you go, well, we've had responses here from 8,000 past learners. One view does not override all of their views. So there is a balancing act to take. But honestly, I really encourage you to get skilled and knowledgeable people to take a look at your training. And don't worry if you have to change it. It'll be better as a result. So that's the purpose of qualification development panels. They approve the technical content, including learning outcomes of NEBOSH qualifications, what we're trying to achieve, why we're trying to achieve it, and we justify, our research. And then they also advise on the consultation process if they feel there's other people we should talk to, if there's an area of the syllabus that's maybe lacking that we haven't addressed or thought about. Thankfully, we've never had to do that because we've always got it about right, because we know what we're doing. But it's also an important part of the process, because if you have missed something, take it away and redo it again. This is people's time, trouble, money, that we're using here. So it needs to be right. There needs to be an absolute benefit in your training. So voting is a really interesting one, actually. So when we do panels, because I'm power mad and I'm usually the chair, I get to have the casting vote, and no other no other NEBOSH staff have a vote within when we're doing syllabus development. I have been through so many qualification development panels. We have never had to vote on a decision. It's usually very obvious what the answer should be, and it's usually very obvious where the content should be within a specification. You don't want supplementary information, peripheral information. It should be focused in on what learners actually need. As I say, we've never had to go, oh, we can't debate this out. Let's do a show of hands. It's never been required, because actually if something takes that level of debate or view, there's a strong argument to say it shouldn't really be in there. Okay. And everybody, everybody comes along to panels, knows why they're there. They behave impeccably. We work with professionals, as I'm sure you would as well. But it is important that, decisions, you try and reach them by consensus wherever possible. But there might be that you want to think of a separate process by where a decision is actually made, certainly if you're working with colleagues and developing your training. But as I say, we've never had to go to the vote ever. I can honestly say that. So now we just thought it'd be valuable to illustrate to you the type of conversations we might have when we're developing products and qualifications. So I've got some questions here that's come through from some of my initial thoughts, some from thoughts I've received from colleagues on LinkedIn, some of the wider consultation questions we've had, and start asking our panelists here what their thoughts are, because it's that sort of thinking which then helps us with those constructs, and then sometimes then filters down towards those learning outcomes and their development. So I'm going to start picking Mike and Aldane's thoughts now in terms of the process safety world, industry, where the focus needs to be on any training. I'd encourage you guys to think about, the target audience for this qualification. It's not for process safety experts such as yourself. It's for those people who are at the coal, the coal front, if you like, or working within the process industries, and helping them to understand better what process safety management actually entails, what it is, and then in turn that then starts helping some of those good process safety cultures that we're looking for within our organizations, those high reliability organizations that we're hoping to have some impact in. So Mike and Aldane, this is more really of a conversation piece really between all of us, and just really try and draw out some of your thoughts and be confident in questioning how I'm capturing some of that thinking, or a discussion between yourselves, because that's what happens in practice during those consultation events. So a nice broad one, and if you see me looking down, it's because I've got my questions, because I'm all high tech. I've got them on my iPad here. So Mike, we'll go to you first, because you're the first one I can see on screen there. What are the core principles and concepts that you believe should be focused on with any process safety management training course? What would you really like to see fundamentally in a training course on process safety?
Well, I think that's quite a broad question, but
yeah.
Let's give it a go. So I guess one of the first things you need to make clear is the distinction between occupational health and safety and what we mean by process safety management, looking at different perspectives on the activities. And the next thing I'd probably move to is possibly one of the most important aspects, which is the organization and personnel, the role of leadership in process safety management. It all hinges on leadership direction and the safety culture within an organization before you even get to the technical aspects. I guess then you'd start off with, what is my safety management system? What is my process safety management system? What are the elements that need to be covered by that? And that would include around the Plan, Do, Check, Act model. You'd have the set out management of change procedures, operating procedures, with roles and responsibilities, those kind of things, and how you go around to the monitoring, the audit aspects of that. And in support of that, a good, clear understanding of what risk management is at an appropriate level for this qualification. It's quite a broad, deep topic overall, so you can probably only touch on some of the elements of it. But what are the principles and the techniques of relevant risk management tools? Maybe some of the pitfalls, and then maybe some of the details around industry type hazards and risks. The flammable, explosive, toxic storage elements. And then last but not least, that input to decision around, what controls are in place, what barriers, prevention, mitigation, and ultimately what's your plan if something does go wrong. I probably said enough there. I'll give Aldane.
No, Mike, sorry, Aldane, just jump in there a moment, because Mike just triggered something in me where it's nice to see you channeling your inner Trevor Kletz there as well, Mike, about talking about the separation between hard hat safety and process safety. But also you alluded to the fact that actually it's a huge subject, and whatever training it is that colleagues develop, how we develop, the three of us, I'm sure, could sit here today and develop a really great 3-week course in process safety. But actually, nobody's going to do it because they can't be released from work for that long, or the numbers that do it who self-study will be really quite small. So when you're developing a qualification, there's this constant, or any training actually, there's this constant battle you go through around, first and foremost, what's educationally sound. That's absolutely key, core, central to any training or qualification, but equally what's commercially acceptable. And as you've just said there, actually, how wide and broad it is. People do 3-year, 4-year, degrees on this sandwich courses. We've got people for about a week. So tailoring that down and really focusing on what's core, what's essential is a real discipline that you need to have. And more so when you've only got people for a matter of hours or a day, as some people do have as well. Aldane, please jump in. Have you got any thoughts on that question?
Yes. For me, it's about preventing major accidents involving hazardous material. So that distinguish it between normal occupational safety, which has to deal with the day-to-day management of hazard in the workspace. A key concept is also the management of assets and their maintenance. So you look at the design, and we speak of more designing out the problem at the start. Procurement, construction, commissioning, operations, modification, and my colleague earlier referred to management of change. So modification and management of change, critical, and the decommissioning of the assets. In a process safety management course for practitioners, it's important to focus on safe plants and equipment and safe systems of work to prevent major accidents.
Yeah.
The culture, very, very critical. That commitment in managing personnel, technology, and facility, very, very crucial for the practitioners out there, the operators, the maintenance technicians.
Yeah.
Leadership, it's a art and it's also a science in managing the process to prevent these catastrophic accidents. So once we speak of process safety management from a practical standpoint, a strong process safety culture must be embedded in the organization, and this is driven by leadership.
Yeah.
On the other hand, employees must understand and comply with safety procedure. And it's not just complying, they are a part of the participation and consultative process, just as we are doing here in trying to improve the NEBOSH qualification in process safety management. And key to it, the ongoing sharing of lessons learned within the operation, within the industry, across industry. So we say vertically, horizontally. And this is also a way of mitigating what we call corporate amnesia. You know, sometime in the industry, we may have accidents that may be catastrophic. And after a few years, person may have forget them. So key to this qualification, we must delve into lessons learned from process safety incidents.
Thanks, Aldane. That's a really good response. And actually, you triggered a question which was put forward, which was around, and please, colleagues who are listening in, keep your questions coming. It's great to see so much engagement. Can you provide examples of real-life incidents or accidents related to process safety that highlight the importance of proper training and qualification? And I think in terms of this qualification, it goes one step further and say it is quite, in my view, for what it's worth, it's really interesting, you know, talking about Texas City and PIPO and all those kind of things. But actually, I'm more interested in the outcomes of those accident investigations rather than the accidents themselves. What's your views on that? Mike, do you want to go first? Really about, is there any particular instance that you would like to see us draw on within training materials, and whether or not you think the benefit is in knowing the whole story or the outcomes of those disasters that have occurred?
Yeah, I support your position. It's really about learning from mistakes and accidents rather than the accident itself. You can understand, you know, some of the physics and things around it, but really it is the lessons learned and what difference, what changes can you make to what you're doing to try and avoid those. I mean, many past accidents have been linked in some form or other to failures in training. I mean, going back to Flixborough, I mean, that was not understanding the potential impact of process changes, not really examining what the differences were. But when they put that sort of temporary elbow in, what that actually meant. Things like Buncefield was an example where, okay, there was technical failures, technical causes, but there was also a failure to see it coming. You know, there were signs. It was identified that there were signs. And another example, just to give a third topic area, was the Deepwater Horizon spill around a number of years back. Collection of errors, but one of those was misinterpretation of data. So these things lead to incorrect decisions in some of these accidents, and really understanding what causes behind those incorrect decisions is quite important. I mean, under COMA, for example, there's a requirement now to reflect on relevant incidents to your particular industry, and taking the learnings from that and demonstrating that you have actually reflected on that in your document. The other aspect, so these are big accidents, big incidents. Unfortunately, there was not too many of those. But Aldane was talking about this earlier. So the learning from your own incidents, your own near misses, which hopefully are much smaller, and really thinking through what that meant, what's gone wrong, and how you can bring that in.
Yeah. Aldane, anything you want to add to Mike's points?
Yes, certainly, Mike and Matt.
Thanks, Mike.
For me, two incidents are the Tesoro, Washington oil refinery fatal fire and explosion in 2010. This incident...
Where was that? Sorry, Aldane.
That's in the USA.
What was?
It's an explosion and fire that led to a fatal injury of 7 employees when their nearly 40-year-old heat exchanger catastrophically failed while a maintenance operation was in place to switch a process stream between 2 parallel banks of heat exchanger. So that's essentially what happened there in the US. Back home and closer to home in our region, the Trinidad February 2022 process safety incident where 4 of 5 underwater welders died while carrying out routine maintenance on an underwater pipeline that was responsible for transporting fuel. These men were working in what was known as a hyperbaric chamber or a habitat. And in the process, there was a failure with the habitat, resulting in what we call in the industry a delta P situation, sucking in or pulling in all these divers into the pipeline. 1 of the 4 divers survived that incident. Lessons learned, planning of job, safe work procedure for executing jobs, emergency response plan if an incident were to occur, training and qualification of persons performing the job are all key lessons to learn from this Trinidad and Tobago February 2022 accident.
Yeah.
And one can do a little more research online. All the information is there on that diving tragedy in Trinidad.
Yeah, there's 2 points which become obvious to me, Aldane, is that I hadn't heard of either of those accidents. I don't know if you have, Mike. I mean, they sound absolutely horrific. Changing heat exchangers is standard process in nearly every process environment I've ever worked in. And I think sometimes we don't really recognize the potential. But the other point with the tragedy involving the divers, actually the outcomes of that and your findings that you just mentioned there around competence, planning, et cetera, that's the sort of stuff, that word again, stuff, that we can include within the specification, because that's where the value is. And it's not just relevant, unless you two gents disagree with me, it's not just specific to that one accident. That approach, it should be integral to how we operate within the process environment. Do you agree?
Certainly.
Yes, no?
Mark.
Yeah. And that's, again, those sort of types of questions. But also you alluded to something really, you triggered something quite important there, Aldane, really, is around wider reading. Don't just assume that. And I think organizations, my understanding is that organizations are getting much better at sharing information. But when we get those emails in and we're all busy and there's, a stack of other emails, is that we take the time to read the lessons learned that's being shared by our communities, and we're passing that on to the workforce at large. I think that's essential. So I'm just mindful of time. We've got so many questions to get through here. So this is quite an interesting one. Are there any emerging trends or technologies in process safety that you think we need to be aware of, or we should reflect within the existing qualification? Is there anything, well, I suppose AI is the obvious one, but how that impacts within the process area, I've no idea. There'll be others. Is there any that either of you chaps would like to mention on emerging technology?
Do you want me to go with that one?
Aldane, yeah, please go for it.
All right, so machine learning and artificial intelligence. We know that in the process industry, we deal with a large data set. And oftentimes it's a challenge for an individual or a team to do the analysis to identify patterns, trends, and anomalies that may be indicative of what to come, the process safety failures, the process safety incident. So use of AI tools as a predictive process or strategy with maintenance is also crucial. So therefore, machine learning and artificial intelligence has its place in the process safety industry. Another component is really the digital twinning and simulation. So for example, Matta, earlier you said you work as an operator in the industry. The operators typically in a control room would have a HMI, human-machine interface, where they will be able to interface or interact with the process out there. So digital twinning is essentially using technology to create that virtual replica of what is taking place out there physically, so the physical process. And by doing so, it enables, one, real-time monitoring, analysis, and even scenario testing. And these, of course, will enhance understanding of the process safety risk on a day-to-day basis during shift. And as we speak of that, it will enhance the whole shift handover, shift turnover process. As all those information will be present there on your system and can be communicated across shift.
Is that sort of becoming fairly mainstream now then, Aldane? Is that technology that you're aware of, that the organization you work in, is it starting to use that, or is that something that's on their longer term plans?
All right, so for the energy sector, more so the utility sector, is becoming mainstream.
Right.
We're having these virtual replicas of the process. It's a standard part of the operation. Brilliant.
Well, the reason I ask is and Mike might be familiar with this from some of the UK-based process environments that you work in. Mike, when I trained, I was in top-tier coma sites, but coma sites that were built in the 50s and 60s. So we still had Taylor instruments in some of our control rooms. I think they were in Spitfires, some of these old instruments that we used to still be using. And we had SCADA systems, and of course we did, and things have evolved. I can't say it was a death trap, because it wasn't, but it was old tech. And the environment I worked in, we had very little redundancy. There was very little investment. So the environment that I worked in is very different to the environment that is now prevalent in lots of places globally. So again, it's another illustration of the importance of sense checking your thinking as to, the job as imagined versus the job as done. I know we tend to use that in terms of human factors, but actually it applies as well within qualification development. Don't assume you've got the answers, because reality might be very different, and you might be somewhat removed from what the reality is at the moment. So, Mike, I'll pick a different question for you, if I may. I'll find you a really hard one. You'll appreciate that. No, I won't do that. So how would you expect emergency response and crisis management to be incorporated within the qualification? Is there any main themes within crisis management and emergency response topic areas that you'd like to see covered?
Yeah, so in terms of emergency response, I guess understanding the inputs to those is important. This is the reason why you're doing your hazard and risk kind of analysis, is to understand what can go wrong. So the importance of the input to the plan, then the importance of the roles and responsibilities within a plan, which is absolutely crucial, and the mechanism of carrying out the plan. So communications and some other aspects may fail. So you may need to have redundancy. So the importance of thinking through what could go wrong just with the plan itself, not just what can go wrong with the plant, but what can go wrong with your plan. The need for exercise. People respond in different ways to crisis. Some respond in positive ways, some respond in other ways. So having exposure to that experience and how important that is needs to come across in the qualification. And also, how you interact with others. You're not a static site. You've got neighbours, you've got emergency services. They all need to be part of the plan. So those are the sort of things that I'd be looking to be included. I mean, there's locations for where there's checklists and things. Coma has checklists. Some other places have checklists to help you develop the plan. But in terms of it's again quite an important process to go through to develop and think it through.
Thanks, Mike. And you and I, we talk regularly anyway with colleagues outside of these conferences. But I was really amazed when I spoke to somebody at one large top-tier coma site who said that they had engineered out all the possible human failing from their operation, and I just thought, wow, what a thing to say. And I think you said to me, well, don't they employ people? And that's it, and you speaking there around emergency response, understanding how people are going to respond, how they may respond. Some people may respond constructively, others a different way, is quite hard to plan for, but it's absolutely imperative that it needs thinking about. So, guys, I'm mindful. Go on, Mike.
Just on that note, I went on a course many years ago where some people who had experienced something going quite wrong on their site, they developed an element of course, and they did this exercise where it was a very artificial exercise, but they'd got where things were up to in an incident, and they were hammering out these pieces of paper with where the changes that had happened during the incident to the participants. So it's very artificial, but you're constantly dealing with, you're trying to discuss with your group what to do, and you're just constantly being thrown new information. Yeah. And you could see some of the teams went to pieces, and this was just a friendly, informal exercise on a course. But yeah,
it's a really good illustration. That actually, I do need to. I'm just mindful of time. I need to wrap this up. I'd like to thank you both I could sit here all day. I love this anyway, but I'm listening to Aldane and you, Mike, about your thoughts. What hopefully the people who are listening in have been able to illustrate is that, or see, is that our conversation has gone in lots of different directions. While we've been talking about principles, we've been talking about incidents, we've been talking about skills, emergency response. And actually, the more conversations that you have with professionals about understanding where the issues are, although it sounds like it's going all over the place, you start to get threads and themes. So you'll eventually come up with something that looks like this, that looks like that more focused approach on one topic area, because you're having that conversation regularly with different people, and those threads and themes start to swim through, and then you can then start separately getting into the detail, which you can then take to things like the product development panels or the sense checking or the professional conversations that you can have with your colleagues about training that you've developed. But don't be surprised if when you first start talking to people about what training solution you need to put together or what qualification me and my team put together, that it all looks like it's all over the place. The more conversations you have, the more it swims into view as to what your product, your training solution, your qualification could look like. And actually, it's the most interesting part of the role. They're getting those big ideas and then starting to craft that down into content. There's nothing better, actually, when you're developing training than starting off with a blank piece of paper. It's often more difficult to do it when you've already got something that's already well developed. So you can see for here, the example here is I would have had an initial conversation about, well, how big an issue is it with contractors? Well, contractors can sometimes outnumber staff in a process environment. Okay, so how do we control them? How do we think about them? How do we engage with them? How do we make them feel part of the community, as opposed to, as I did when I was a contractor, very often, you might as well be on the other side of the fence. So about bringing them in central to what our process safety management system is doing, there's some content there which hopefully goes a long way to do that. And that will have come about from those conversations that we've had. So we are now going to have to wrap this up. There's some contact details in there. If you've got any extra questions you want to ask, I'm more than happy to talk to you about them. Please link in with us. You'll be able to find Mike and Aldane online. Aldane, I think you're quite active on LinkedIn. Is that right? Mike, less so, I think. Or Mike, I'm not sure. Yes. You don't even know if you've still got a LinkedIn account, I think you said. So, but I'd really like... Sorry. Oh,
yes, I'm on LinkedIn.
Yeah, oh, great. Are you happy for people to link in with you, Aldane?
Yes.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, I'd like to thank again my panelists, Mike and Aldane. You get an extra special thanks for getting up so early in the morning. And you're also on annual leave today, so I really, really appreciate that as well. I know you've got a really nice day planned ahead of you, so I'm slightly jealous about what you're doing later today. But thank you for joining us. Thank you for listening. Enjoy the rest of the conference. There's some absolutely fantastic guests and speakers coming up. I'm sure you're going to enjoy it. Please stay tuned, and I hope to speak to you all again soon. Thank you.
Thank you too.
Thank you.